Good evening to all. Everybody is welcome in this session of webinar. As we all know that Delhi Metropolitan Education keep on organizing these kind of sessions, and for the last 2 months continuously we are organizing webinars on topics which are contemporary, which are pertinent, which are of interest to the people, and which are benefiting as far as the knowledge is concerned. And what we have been trying to do these 2 months, we have also been trying to invite the scholarly persons, the known names in their field. So it's a completely knowledge giving and taking exercise which we have entered into. And what we try to do at DME, that this is a time we can continue with this kind of exercise, because though this lockdown is now almost over, but then we all were in lockdown, confined to our homes, and this is something which kept us connecting. Any webinar that I have been organizing on behalf of DME, I have been witnessing that the registration is always in hundreds, and then people are joining from all parts of the country, at least from 15 to 20 states. So I have been finding the participation is there. And to my utter surprise and to my utter pleasure also, that people keep me asking as to when is the next webinar. So this is the level of the excitement or the enthusiasm which keep me moving. So for that, I am thankful to all the participants, to all those media educators, researchers, PhD students, and the students of the bachelor's and the master's program who are always joining these kind of webinars. So today also we have organized a session which is on a pertinent subject. And if at the outset I can tell you something more about the institute, about the institution which I represent. This is Delhi Metropolitan Education. This is an emerging institute which is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. We offer different kind of programs, and this journalism and mass communication bachelor's program is one of them. And we have more than 500 students studying journalism and mass communication here. And then we also offer two programs in 5-year integrated law, which is BA LLB and BBA LLB. And besides that, there is a management program, bachelor's degree in management. So our students are very, very enthusiastic, and all our media students, they are always in this whole exercise of learning and studying. And that is how we and me and my faculty members, they gladly undertake such kind of exercises. So I welcome all the participants and everybody, and to straight coming to today's session. Since in media education, journalism is a major component, so we decided to have this session which is completely focused on journalism. And as we all are aware, this whole new concept of data journalism, though it's not that way new, I mean, for many years we have been talking about this, and in the industry it is being practiced to some extent. And at the same time, in media industry, particularly in television channels, we have been finding the kind of journalism which we can put in the category of narrative journalism. So from the conventional journalism, which was based on 5Ws and 1H, we have come a long way. And if I can initially say this in one line, simply to lay the foundation for today's lecture, because the expert is with us, Dr. Umashankar Pandey. He will be dealing with everything in detail. But if I can tell you in one line, then what we understand by narrative journalism, which has a creative instinct. Though we normally, conventionally, we find that is can be no creativity in news. News is something which is hard and which is based on facts. But in narrative journalism, definitely we infuse to some extent the creative instinct. It's a creative non-fiction presentation, and in news channels we find this kind of practice. Though this does not mean that if there is something creative, then it has to not to be based on facts. Facts are very sacrosanct. And then when we talk about data journalism is obviously which is based on data. And what is meant by data? It has to be based on the facts and the statistics. But here also the presentation has to be such wherein interpretation becomes easy. So that way interpretation becomes an inseparable part of data journalism. And the kind of technology which is available to us these days, we can use the lot of computer applications and the designing element which is very much there in data journalism, or what I can say, the data visualization part in data journalism, that is very much there. So that is how we have decided the topic for today: narrative journalism versus data journalism, or as we can put it, narrative journalism and data journalism. We will try to find out the intricate things about both and the points of differences, if any, that exist between the two. And to talk on this very, very pertinent issue for all journalism educators and journalism professionals, we have with us Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey, who is a known name in the circuit of media educators and researchers. He is a head of the journalism and media department in Surendranath College in Kolkata. But then he is a figure which is not only known nationally but internationally. He represents IAMCR, and he has been involved in academic and the research activities under the IAMCR umbrella. And you can find him always very, very active whenever we talk about any academic venture, any research based thing. He is there. He has authored books, he has authored research papers, and he kindly agreed to be here when I requested to him to talk about this particular topic. So thank you, Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey, to be with us in this session.
Thank you, Ambrish ji, for having me. It's a privilege to be a part of this lecture series.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to see some wonderful friends from all over. All my friends I can see over on the screen, on the small screen. And so nice to be, seeing them all. And basically, before going to data journalism, it's important to talk about, as you said, narrative journalism as such. So people who have attended my earlier data journalism sessions, they'll find this one different from the others because, as I was just telling you, it's not right to keep on repeating the old stuff. Yeah. So it will be, at some places I'll try and make it very simple for the students, but at the same time there are a lot of conceptual and philosophical issues that I want to touch upon. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation for this, so with your permission I'll try and
please
use that. I hope it's visible on your screen.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, good.
Right. So before I start, this is one very important work that has come out in the last 2 years, and I've talked about this earlier as well. This is about C.W. Anderson. His book is called Epistles of Certainty, and it's been published by Oxford University Press. Now, there's one thing that he starts off with. He says that journalism is epistemologically, kind of unique because there are two things that it deals with. One is a very modest thing, that the work it does is very simple. It just has to report the news of the day quickly. But the other thing that which it assumes is that it possesses the right methodological tools to objectively parse social reality. That journalism makes this claim that it has the exact tools to decipher what is the social reality. And that is, a lot of philosophers would say this is an incredible epistemological claim. So between a modest epistemological claim to this incredibly extreme, epistemological claim, journalism is regarded by many people, as some kind of an oddity. Now we'll just go back about 6 decades, just about the history. Narrative journalism, as you started by saying, it's about, it also addresses by offering the how and why and what next questions, because it's not just about who said what and, he said he added kind of journalism, but it goes something beyond that. It tries to tell a story. And that's very important, because when you're telling a story, it is a representation of events as such, but it is also a reconstruction of reality whose main purpose is to make sense of events. I'll go back to our mythological stories as well. The idea was to make people understand why and how it's happening, and so that they can make sense of it. Or the truth claims of journalism can be addressed by these storytelling techniques, because a story must have causal links, because if you do not have causal links that explain events, you just can't just have it as a chronological succession, that this happened and this happened and this happened, because the meaning of the news is very important. I'll come back to all these points in in my presentation in just a moment. But it's important that we realize that telling a story is about going beyond mere observation of facts. It is not just plain observation of fact and putting it out to people. It is drawing the most important elements, or drawing the interesting elements, so that people can make sense of the events, or the truth claims of that event can be established to people who are reading that story. And very importantly, narrators are very central to this process, because they are the people who would decide what are the elements of the narration to pick out and to send it out to people. So this is something which appears quite natural these days, because we've been used to these kind of storytelling techniques for quite a few years. But this is not how it has always been. It was quite different. I mean, conventional journalism was much different from narrative journalism, because these stories they also let people co-experience. I'm just going back to these storytelling techniques before I come to the history and the other parts of narrative journalism, because you have to have characters, you have to have deeper meaning, so it lets people co-experience. It's not just about information, it's about something beyond information, that people can co-experience what's happening, so that the truth claims are established through the storytelling technique. When people co-experience, they know, okay, it's reality, okay, it should have happened that way, or they make sense of those events, which otherwise through conventional through conventional journalism strategies, they were probably not available. This is a universal phenomenon, and this popularity of narratives is not just culture specific, because almost every culture they have certain strategies of storytelling, or certain archetypal mythic characters. We'll talk about that as well. But the activity of sharing stories is deep rooted, and it's universal, as you can see. It has a lot of purposes. It can entertain one another. It can establish group identities. It can make people recognize how to react in unexpected or dangerous situations. So it just goes beyond the stated aim of informing people. It can provide a much richer experience to the readers of this narrative techniques. So it can be traced down to patterns that have been there in fairy tales, whether they're folk stories or not. But these storytelling techniques have been there for ages, and a lot of kind of similar characteristics can be seen across different cultures. Now, a lot of historians, journalism historians, if you can see that quaint-looking cover on the right side of the screen, that's by Tim Wolfe, and it's even quaintly named as the candy-colored tangerine flake streamlined baby. After this session, you can please Google search about that, and this is where he started. Tom Wolfe is credited with this narrative form of journalism. He started this debate that we have to go beyond the conventional journalism. That's why the unorthodox approach was there in even the way he framed the title of this particular book of his. So he was trying to emphasize that if we do not go beyond these conventional journalism techniques, then we'll be failing in our different attempts to make these truth claims, or make people aware of the important events behind the story, or the significance or the context of this story. So he is responsible for this, and right from the beginning, he used the tools of literary fiction, including exquisite detail, even internal monologue. People having a monologue with themselves. The short story structure, which has a character, which has a problem, and which has a resolution. So during the mid 60s, this was a fairly new thing to do, because journalism was still about the inverted pyramid, or just information. He said and he had it kind of a thing. So when these things started coming in, and then it was realized the power of storytelling was something that was astounding, something that people even couldn't imagine that this is where it was. And there's been a lot of work on narrative journalism in contemporary scholarly literature in communication and media. This is from I'm making this kind of a quote just to tell you that there's still a lot of recent work going on. And by the end of the presentation, I'll come back to narrative journalism as well. So this is not only just juxtapositioning narrative journalism with data journalism, which of course is a very a major strand of discourse about journalism techniques, but also trying to see whether we can find a meeting point between the two. So that's why we keep going back and forth between the work that has been done on that. So between narrative journalism and fiction, of course, the relation to truth and reality. Narrative journalism applies the same technique, but unlike fiction, it makes a truth claim, and that's a very important part. That journalism has been struggling for a long time to establish these truth claims. Whatever I'm suggesting is believable and credible and truthful, and making people believe that. It's not just about putting out a story, but making people believe that. So that is one difference between that. Narrative journalism deals with the present generally, rather than the past. It deals with the present. Folk stories, again, we have all those archetypals. I don't want this to be only about narrative, so I'm just just putting it a superficial kind of a sketchy background, and then we'll go forth with data and all of this stuff. So we know that folk stories generally has a hero in pursuit of a goal, or helping a person in need, while there is an opponent who throws a spanner in the works. And this is a kind of a structure which is pretty general, and this has been there. This story technique has been applied in very very many cases. So this is one type of storytelling where there is a hero who is in pursuit of general good, and there are opponents who are throwing spanners in the work. This might sound very familiar to you, but this is one storytelling technique that has stayed on for many years now. Many archetypes. This is just one of it. I mean, as we are going along, if there are questions or suggestions or whatever, Ritik would help us to kind of telling us if there's a question in between. So I would know if people have anything to ask in between, or if they want a particular clarification, I can do as the presentation is going on.
So Professor Saxena will be taking up the questions
at the end, not right now. Okay.
Yeah, he's moderating the entire show, so he'll.
Okay, he'll do that. Right. Thank you so much. So these are some of the archetypes that there are many more, but these are archetypes which are found in almost all cultures. It's kind of almost universal, because this is seen in many different cultures, different situations, contexts. The victim, the scapegoat, the hero, the good mother, the trickster, the villain, many other cases. So these archetypes are also used in these narrative structures of journalism to make those truth claims. Again, I spoke of juxtapositioning narrative with data journalism. One of the ways in which narrative journalism is framed is that it is a form of art. We'll just see that data journalism is framed more as science. So this is more as an art form, and that's why we go back to all those storytelling structures. So this is an extension of the perception that narrative journalism is high quality journalism. This is not conventional journalism. This is high quality journalism, or this is beyond everyday journalism. Because it is high quality journalism, it is also the highest achievable for journalists. If you can put up a wonderful narrative that has a resonance with readers, then many people would be interested in reading your stories. So that's why it is regarded as high quality journalism, or it's framed as high quality journalism. So far so good. wonderful storytelling techniques, using all these methods to establish truth claims, and also because we know that there is also this psychological aspect of co-experiencing and everything else, so that people can make better sense of the context and the significance of the story. So far, so good, and it has gone on really well for all these years. Now there have been a lot of situations where narrative journalism has taken a strong beating, and one of these situations was in the year 1980 when Janet Cook wrote a piece, and this is all available on the Google. If you search for Janet Cook Washington Post, you'll get to know about this. Janet Cook wrote a moving piece, with all wonderful narrative structures about a 13-year-old heroin addict, Jimmy, in Washington Post in 1980. Unfortunately for her, that piece won a Pulitzer Prize. Why am I saying unfortunately? Because once you win a prize, there is greater attention to the story. People wanted to know, where is Jimmy? What is he doing? 1 year back, he was in that kind of a situation. When people started trying to find out where is Jimmy, it was soon found out that Jimmy did not exist. There was no Jimmy. Janet Cook had just made up that wonderful narrative story, and it's a beautiful piece of literature. And if you read that, you can see how well it was written. But it soon became obvious that narrative journalism tempted many writers to avoid fact checking for the fear that it might ruin a good story. Since I have a good story, let it be. So that probably is enough. A good story is enough. I need not look beyond that. And that's where problems started with narrative journalism. That was 1980. In 2017, in this 18th volume of the journalism journal, these authors, Van Krijken and Jose, they repeat the same thing, that these use of literary techniques is a precarious affair because it tempts journalists to alter the truth. Because you're just using these storytelling techniques, there is no way in which people can find out what is the truth. So aesthetic considerations can dominate over the traditional principles of objectivity and factuality. Since it is high journalism, we don't have to think about all these things. Because we are telling a good story, that is the be all and end all. And that ultimately led journalism to lose its credibility and authority. And that is where I'm juxtapositioning it with data journalism. That this was one major flaw. It did the initial work very well. It did it wonderfully well about informing readers and even establishing the truth claims. Not even establishing, taking people on a ride through this discovery of truth. But the problems of non-verifiability, the problems of certain people, of certain, even very senior, reputed, respected, Pulitzer-winning journalists, who were tempted to, make up stories to make a good narration, and that led people to think about precision journalism. In my earlier lecture as well, I have spoken about precision journalism, but this is a very, very important landmark. Just almost as important as 1965 Tom Wolfe landmark that I just spoke about. Now, precision journalism was, where Philip Mayer wanted to adopt these social science methods into journalism. Treating, treating ideas or events as things that had to be established. Using the same rigorous methods that we use in social science and other sciences. Using those methods, you have to establish truth. So the problem of truth claim will no longer be satisfied through these wonderful narrative structures only. It has to be by adopting this scientific method, the scientific objectivity. And these were the questions that precision journalism asked its practitioners to answer: how to find information, how to evaluate and analyze information, how to present this information so that in the information overload, people can make sense of that information. And then amount of precision required for a particular story. So this was about using statistical techniques of outliers and correlations and regressions and all such stuff to find out the real story and then take it up to people. And that is very important, and that's important even now because we are dealing with a massive information overload. 1 zettabyte is 100 crore terabytes. 1 TB, I'm sure everybody knows the terabyte. So that is the amount of digital data which is present in the world. This is just an estimate. About 40 zettabytes of digital data is present in the world. Almost everything can be reduced to a 0 and 1. And it's so much information that if you put it on DVDs, that those stacks of DVDs would be long enough to circle Earth 50 times. That is the amount of data we have. And I'm sure we've all heard about big data, and that's where I want to draw the distinction from small data that we data journalists will be doing. Big data, to put it very, very simply, is something that you cannot access or even analyze on 1, 2, or 3 computers. You require a bigger cloud-based system to analyze those big data structures. Most of the data that we'll be using is small data. For example, if you remember WikiLeaks, that was a few gigabytes. If you remember the Panama Papers, the whole of Panama Papers, which was almost about 5,000 stories and 400 journalists from 100 organizations across 80 countries, that was just 2.4 terabytes. So what we want to emphasize for educators and for practitioners is that this is something which is very doable. This data journalism is not something only for computer coders or only for big data stuff, but it is also for low technology, small data stuff that everybody can access through their Google spreadsheets or Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. Now, this is a very important problem that journalists face: the inability to make sense of what is happening, and that's there everywhere. Citizens are bombarded with all this information, and this is where you have to make sense of what information means. Meaning of the news becomes more important. We keep on repeating that it's not just raw information which is important, but what the raw information means. Looking for the woods in the trees and looking for the trees in the woods. Looking for associations, looking for context, looking for significances, so on and so forth. So this is a very important task for journalists, to make people understand the sense of data, or what data means, in these situations. Because when data was scarce, a journalist was good enough as a source. If a journalist knew such and such person who had access to such and such information, who had access to such and such databases, then that journalist, was sitting on a gold mine, and he would, keep on mining the stories one after the other. But now information is abundant. You are on the other side. You have to filter information. You have to make sense and structure of the never-ending flow of data, because this data is everywhere. So apart, different from the journalistic sources, data itself is a source. And I will just, in a moment describe about how you have to be very careful about dealing with, data sources, because you have to exercise the same discretion as you would exercise with other, journalistic sources. And another very important point that we keep reminding students and educators as well: data journalism is journalism first and data second. So all the soft skills of journalism, of creativity, of curiosity, and of criticality, all these soft skills are a given. If you're not curious, if you're not critical, and if you're not creative in seeking and presenting information, then probably data journalism will not give you all the answers. So the soft skills are assumed. We assume that the soft skills of journalism are there because, again, journalism has to deal with public interest. Journalism has to, talk about, journalistic ethics of accessing data and presenting it and, making it accessible. So our job is to make sense and structure of this never-ending flow of data, because the meaning of the news is very important to decipher the signal from noise. There is so much of noise everywhere that how do you decipher, or how do you find out what is the true signal, or what is the right signal that people need to know, or the signal that people should understand. So that again is a very important area that is important for journalists. But the problem is that there is so much of data that you can almost prove anything that you want to. So that's a very important pitfall to understand, that if you do not know where you're getting data from, if you do not know what the data is how it was collected, how it was analyzed, or who was behind that data collection, unless you are aware of the pitfall before you start into data journalism, then you will be not answering the right question, because there is lots and lots and lots of data, and much of it is available publicly. Another very important data pitfall that we keep reminding people is about the Goodhart's law, and that's what we must remember as journalists, as communicators, because if a measure becomes a target, that this is what we have to achieve, or this is this is a p-value and this is a target, then it ceases to be a good measure. This is what Goodhart's law is. So when people talk about targets, or when people throw evidences at each other, because in this social media ecology, we have people on both sides of the spectrum, coming up with similar kind of data, and drawing different conclusions out of data. But if we do not realize the significance of that data, then we will not be doing a good job out of it. So if the measure becomes a target, then the measure is not a good measure, because then people are trying different means of attaining that particular target. As we know in statistics very well, that if the p-value is 0.05, so you would remove certain, and it has been seen that you remove certain instances, or you remove certain observations, so that you can get a p-value of 0.05. It also happens with government data all over the world, because if that is your target, that okay, we have to reach 80%, then a lot of it would not make good sense to real people. And these are the questions that data journalists have to ask about, how the data was sourced, how it was analyzed, and what is it that the data doesn't tell us, because data at the end of the day is a source. I have to use it as a source and as a tool. Data itself is not a story. It's there. Data is available on all government sites. It's available on all public sites. But your idea is to hit them with a headline figure that makes them sit up and take notice. This is not about clickbaiting, but providing them with information that makes sense to them. So giving them that headline figure that makes them sit up and take notice that this is the important story about, and weaving it in such a manner that people are able to read the story without having to know that it comes from a data set. Because if you talk about lots and lots of numbers, then you're making the story boring, and people are interested, or people would be better served if you spoke of the significance and the context of this data, rather than just bombarding them with all the numbers that you come across. So if it is not exciting, if it does not make good reading, and that's where we will come back to the narrative structures by the time we end this presentation, that we have to make it exciting, and we have to make it presentable for the reader. But they should be able to make sense of the story without knowing that it comes from a data set. As I said, the data set is just our source. Just as we have normal journalistic sources, these are our regular sources. As I was showing earlier as well, there's lots and lots of work happening on data journalism all over the world. These are just last 2 or 3 years books, and I'm showing the ones that I currently have. So you can imagine the entire academic fraternity is doing this on a very regular basis. Almost every American and European school these days has some element on data journalism, either as a elective, or in many places they have it as a core course, because this is where the story comes from. Because in the digital environment, in the digital ecology, we have all this data, and we have to give the tools to people to make sense of that data. Because if you are not providing them the tools, then journalism will be insufficient at in the present times. So data can be the source of news stories, or it can be the tool with which the story is told. So it is both a source and a tool. But as I keep reminding, like all other journalistic sources, the data should be treated with skepticism. What it does not tell us, not just about what it tells us, what it does not tell us. Is there any other question that I can ask from data? Because it's, as I said just a little while back, it's different from word journalism only in the sense that we are using a different toolkit. It's just like our regular journalism. Instead of the camera, we have the laptop where where we are making these analysis. Data requests, then that's where we keep on reminding that it's about just three major parts of data journalism. First, about how you acquire data. Second, how you clean and analyze it. And third, how you present it. So the first part is very important. How and where to acquire data. Data requests should begin with a list of questions you want to answer. So there are a lot of undocumented features in data, and you must be aware about that. And if you know where to look for, I'm not this is not a presentation only on data journalism. So I'm not talking about various sources where we can extract data from, but there is if I can just talk about one, it is Google dataset search. You can go for dataset search, and there are three areas basically where we get data stories from, or three areas where beginning beginning journalist or a journalist who's starting off can work with is crime, is education, and it's health. And that's important, because, or even weather these days, because these are areas where you get data from a number of different sources. So you can get data on crime or from a number of sources, on health, on different aspects of health these days, as well as education and weather. There are dataset searches. I'm not going to talk about the dataset searches right now, but why are we as journalists doing it? Because we can draw the connections, we can draw the associations, we can find out the reasons, we can provide the context, we can provide the story, and we can put it out in a manner in which people can find it very interesting. I just spoke of the structured data which are present as Excel sheets or CSV files or such formats, which are structured formats available on the internet. There is advanced Google search, and if you write file type :XLS, then you are going to get Excel sheets. Or if you write file type CSV, then you will get a lot of CSV sheets, and you can put it out. You can take it onto your Google spreadsheet or your Microsoft Excel and can do the normal analysis with it. Then you can get data from a lot of social media sites, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. There are tools for that. There are a lot of social media research tools, and this is not about social media. I'm not talking about that. A very important technique is web scraping, because you must have heard about web scraping in a number of. I'll take the questions all together, or do you want me to answer right now? Or shall I stop the presentation here? This is for Amrish ji and for Ritik.
Dr. Pandey, if you wish, you can continue for a few more minutes, and then we will take the questions.
Okay. Thank you. So web scraping techniques, there are lots and lots of programming languages, and you may have seen me sharing some of the work that we do. But there are many kind of existing apps like Down Them All, where you can simply scrape data from websites, and those unstructured data can be put in a structure, and you can do the analysis from there. After you access this data, you put it onto a Google spreadsheet, or you put it onto an Excel spreadsheet, and you do the analysis. I'm not going to talk about the analysis part, but I'm just going to talk about very quickly. I will talk about what are the stories you can look for in the data. Say, for example, I have these rows and columns. So we have to get used to the rows and columns now. Once we have these rows and columns, what are the stories that I can get from? This is all from datajournalism.com. If you go there, you'll find all these things. So one is the exact measurement, what is it that the story is about, the total figure. The second story that you can find about there is the proportion, what proportion of this or what percentage of this, and things like that. The third story, I'm going quickly, because just trying to tell you the stuff that we can do with analysis. There's much more than that. This is just certain types. Internal comparison, trying to compare this thing to other parts of the same place, the same district or other district. External comparison with other districts, with other states, with other countries, or other situations. The data, comparing it with other situations. Change over time. How has it changed over time? Using it as league tables. How are these 4 or 5 states doing it? You must have seen that in COVID cases. It's almost that league table structure. Analysis by categories and drawing associations. So basically, when we are talking about data, we are either looking for trends, or we are looking for outliers, or we are looking for these kind of associations. So these are just 7 or 8 ways in which we can draw stories out of data. So the first part of data journalism is about accessing information. As I said, there are many public data sites, and there are these data search. Google has a data search, different search for data search, data set search. So with that, I access data, or through right to information, or through other means, you get access to databases, and then you clean the data, and then you analyze it. And we are right now talking about the analysis part, because it's important to think of the alternatives as well, and that's very important. And that's where journalists and communicators come in, because generally all this analysis is done by experts, and they are giving you a story from the same data. But if you know of these very similar, very small tricks or small analysis, then you would know what are the questions to ask, what are the other stories there, what are the alternatives there. So a simple single data set can provide you with many stories. But as I said, these are just numbers. You will have to look for human examples. You will have to weave that into a narrative structure. But at this point, we must know about the alternatives that exist. And it's hard, it's not easy. These associations are not simple, because it's about having the nose for the news. And that's why we are different from, the non-journalists looking at the same information. A journalist would know what is the story there. A journalist would know what questions to ask of data. So it's not, as simple as, just, finding out a data set and getting story there. There may be dead ends. There are, no stories at the end of the day. But, this is hard work like regular journalism. But this is the future. If you are not data savvy, then, earlier it was just about, chatting up people and, getting stories from them. But this is more, this is all about, poring over data and equipping yourself with the tools to analyze. As I keep repeating that again and again, when we started journalism 20 years back, we had to learn Microsoft Word. Our previous generation, they didn't know how to type on computers. They would write on, sheets of paper, and they would give it to, the composing people to type it. Now, journalists will have to learn Microsoft Excel and Google Spreadsheet, because if you're not doing that, then you are keeping yourself away from, you're keeping yourself away from so many good story ideas, so many good data sources. I will answer about, all the questions that you've asked. I will, I'll use this as my last slide, because this conjunction of narrative journalism, data journalism has become very important, because the truth claims need to be backed up by these verifiable claims. We are in the open science movement, where we, provide all the data that we have, and let people make or let people verify our truth claims. That's very important. But at the same time, the traditional techniques of storytelling is very important. Making it important, making sense to people, using the human interest stuff, using, other narrative techniques to make the story interesting, because statisticians are, kind of notorious for being very bad communicators. And that's where we come in. It's not just about the statistical tools, it's about making sense of the, data to create stories out of that. And that's where I'll end here. And if there are questions, I'm sure there are many, I'll answer those questions as they come along. So my presentation ends here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Umashankar Pandey, for making such a nice presentation. And I can look at it the way people were taking interest and the questions that were being asked continuously. So to begin with, few questions which I can look at right now. The first question that was asked by Sumedha Chaudhary, she asked as to how this ICT of graphics can be used in data journalism.
Yeah, that's the third part of it. Yeah, start. Yeah. I didn't put up the third part of the presentation, which was about presentation. I said there are three aspects of data journalism: the acquiring, the accessing part, the cleaning and the analysis part, and the presentation part. And the data visualization is a very, very important area of data journalism. How I present it in an interactive form. You would have seen the New York Times story, but on the front page they had all the 100,000 names of people who were affected by COVID-19 there, and in their print version, it was an interactive element there. So that's important. This data visualization is a very, very important element.
Yeah. So there is another question which has been asked by Soumya Datta. He asked that, he has referred to the election data which is available on Google information and pertaining to the political campaign which is there in the US. So what kind of sources he has asked a political journalist can use?
See, for data, you have to rely to the official sources, because there are all sorts of data. So for election figures, we will always only rely on the Election Commission of India figures, and they have a very nice website for that, and they have what's there on the screen now? Are we having Facebook on this screen now?
Yeah, your screen is seen here.
Oh, I can see some Facebook.
Ritik?
Yeah, that's no problem. I guess, yeah, that's better. So that's important, the source, what are your data sources? That's very, very important. And that's a very important element, or in fact, that's a very important area of data journalism, of trying to tell people about the authenticity of the sources, or, how people collect that information. So if the information has been collected by people who have a wrong story to tell, then you're not doing right. But then, as I said, after the data, that data must make sense to the readers. They must not, just see it only in terms of numbers, but they must see it in terms of a trend or a story or an association or things like that.
Dr. Pandey, one of the participants in this session, Sudhir Kumar, has asked that how the audience can be engaged through data journalism.
As I said, linking it to something larger, whether if you can, if there's say for example water scarcity in your area, and you have these data sources through which you find out about the water level and so on and so forth. I'm just trying to give a hypothetical example. If you can link it to a larger story, or if you can talk about the trends, or you can say these are the things that are responsible, then people start up and take notice. Just informing them there's a water scarcity, or this is just 50% or 40% makes no sense. But as I said, drawing stories out of from your data. So you're using the data as a source to draw these interesting stories, and then weaving it in a manner in which you would do your novel narrative stories. So that's very important of how you present it. If these are just plain numbers, even in a headline, people are not going to read it. I mean, that's plain and simple. If you say 40% of the people are no longer, don't have access to drinking water, that's, probably a put off. You have to put it in a manner in which it appears more interesting and it appears, more significant, or they can understand the true significance of the story. So your data set, your source, and you're drawing stories from your data set, and your story becomes a lot more verifiable. But at the same time, as I said, you have to show it whether it is just episodic, or it's a part of a trend, or there is more to it, or whether it can be associated with any, government policy, or with any, corporate event that has taken place, or etc. So this is, more about drawing interesting stories and telling it in an interesting manner.
Yeah, Ishpreet Singh has asked that how can we make sure as a journalist when you are using a source that that is actually an original source?
Of course, as I said, how you draw it, and that's a very important area. When you use particular websites, and there are tools to find out, about who owns the website, or who runs, and there are, what is my domain. There are these tools through which we can find about the authenticity, because people use these similar sounding names to appear very authentic. If I have to, put up a website, it's very easy for me, and I can make it look like some authentic website. So you must know, just the the name of the website is not enough. There are tools by which you can find out who owns this domain and how old it is and what is the credibility of that domain, and so on. So that's why this data set search, Google does it for you. When it brings out the data set search, it belongs to some kind of a reputable organization. And if you're not using that, then probably you cannot even quote it in your stories. Otherwise, it will be insufficient. So that is the first part. As I said, we have to ask that question: how was it sourced? How was it analyzed? What does it doesn't tell us? That's the question.
Yeah, and Mr. R.K. Singh, who is present in this session and who is a very senior broadcaster, he has been the chief engineer in GOODHART'S. So he has asked that how artificial intelligence can be used in data journalism.
That's a fantastic thing. As I said, I was limiting myself to a low technology, but that's a very important area. And machine learning and artificial intelligence has become very important these days. Now, I'm sure all of us, kind of experience this machine learning things when we are writing a Google mail. Gmail tells us what probably is the next word you're planning to type. It can sense, from your writing style, it can sense that what you're planning to type. And it makes suggestions, whether I can do that. Facebook also uses that. If I put up a Facebook picture, it tells me that this person could be this, or this place could be this. So artificial intelligence, we basically use machine learning basically. So there is a distinction between machine learning and artificial. So machine learning basically involves in telling the computer that this is the training set. We train the computer on the training set and make them make predictions about the future. So I can put out 100 or 1,000 of pictures and tell them, okay, these are Indians, or these are North Indians, or these are I'm just giving an example. It may not always be something as cool as this. I train the computer on a particular data set so that the computer can make predictions about future events. I'll just talk about one story. That's a very interesting story, and you can get it on Google. Now, people have performed these machine learning techniques to find out whether these planes, they were spy planes or not. Because when you have all these planes hovering around, they have a certain particular paths, and spy planes have some other path structures. So a computer can be taught that, okay, these are spy planes and these are not spy planes. Through that, you can make stories about, okay, over this particular city, New York, for example, we had so many spy planes hovering from this time to this time, and then you can draw stories about why and what next and how, etc. So we have wonderful techniques of machine learning going on, and for that, many journalism schools, they start teaching coding to students. Python, for example, is a very good coding software, program for programming language for machine learning. And Google has many options like TensorFlow, etc. So these are all packages. So you must we have natural learning toolkit, NLTK, we have scikit learning, and we have all these packages which exist, and they're very simple stuff which you can do it in your in your regular classes as well. In fact, a lot of computer science schools are already doing it, and we have this opportunity of collaborating them.
Dr. Pandey, one of the participants, as initially also you have named him Madhav Chandra from Bangladesh. He can ask, can data be wrong, misleading, harmful, and invasive?
Again, very important, the problems of datafication, I'm not getting into the philosophical side of it, but if data is intentionally wrong, then you, as a journalist, should be able to know, that talk about the source. Otherwise, if an official source comes out with wrong data, the only way you can, prove its wrongness is through anecdotal stories. Say, for example, we have had such stories when people were saying that, okay, this district is open defecation free. That was the data which would exist. And journalists would actually go out into areas to find out, things which were, to prove that ODF is probably not correct. So, if official data is wrong, then probably you can do very little about it. But if if your sources are correct, then you're filtering out the wrong data right at the beginning. So that's not much of a problem if you're dealing with authentic data, because there are a lot of requirements of the law as well. Right to Information Act requires them to put out all this data upfront. It requires the government agencies to put out this.
Yeah, Dr. Pandey, one of the participants who is a journalism student in DME Media School only, he has, Hardik Dogra, he has asked plenty of questions, but the last question that he has just asked is that the data released by the government agencies and the data released by the research sites and other such websites. So, I mean, how a journalist can handle the data which is available there, which is more authentic, which is more to be accepted as reliable?
As I said, asking those questions, that who is behind the data, that's a very, very important question. And that's a question that we ask in media literacy classes as well. And that's so very important in data literacy classes too. Who is behind the data? And what is it that they're not telling us? And we have to keep on asking these questions. If it doesn't tell me that, or if it doesn't go on with a larger trend, or if it doesn't go along with the global trend, because we have a lot of global data as well. And if it doesn't match, then it's a wonderful story. Then you have got out a gold mine. That, okay, this is the story that has come up with from this particular agency, and this is what the global agency has to say, and this is where there's a mismatch, and that's where the story. As I said, this is hard work, but this is something that has to be done, and this is something what is being done these days.
Dr. Pandey, one of the participants, Sunadeep, he has asked whether we teach in university education in our syllabus the requirement as far as the teaching about data journalism is concerned. Since you have been there, you are there in many BOS and syllabus making exercise. So, do you feel that this the data journalism should be part of the syllabus, and whatever education is required to journalism student that is being given?
No, it's very, very important. As I said, the soft skills are there, but you have to teach them the hard skills of acquiring, accessing, and presenting data. And these are there as one full semester courses, and it has to be there both at the UG and the PG level. Fortunately, I've had thanks to UNICEF Rajasthan and UNICEF Gujarat, and I've had a few workshops for practicing journalists. And there you don't have to talk to them about the soft skills, but to your UG students, you have to talk about your soft skills as well. The soft skills of journalism first, and then the hard skills of data journalism. And you remember, Dr. Saxena, in the last BOS that we were together for university in Bengal, we actually managed to put in data journalism there. So we are making these beginnings, and it will be there because that is what the future is, and that is what you can do right sitting at your home, and you can make some wonderful stories which is verifiable, which every reader can verify, because otherwise there's no way in which they can verify your truth. Because one way in which you make it verifiable is that you put out videos or put out exact quotes. That's one way, but data is something that everybody can make sense of.
Dr. Pandey, one of the listeners, I forgot the name, he has asked, he has referred to two schools of data journalism, one which is more dependent or which believe more on the field work, and another which is more into data analysis. Can you further elaborate on this?
As I said, the first part is, where you have those anecdotal stories and you make sense of it. But that, as I said in my last slide, and that's where the conjunction is important. That one about the larger picture, the larger significance, and then looking out at human examples of that to make a story, because otherwise it would be a very dry story. But or if you just have the human example, and if you're not putting the larger context there, then it is just one singular story. But if you put that story as part of a larger trend, then that story becomes more important. It would even have global ramifications. So that's very important. So it's no longer just about these two divergent schools, but drawing the best of these two schools and putting it out for the readers.
Mr. R.K. Singh has again asked one question, though you have touched upon the big data. I mean, only as a reference, because obviously the time does not permit to go further deep into this. But Mr. Singh's question is that what is the relationship between big data and data journalism?
As I said, a lot of the important stuff that journals like New York Times and Washington Post they're doing, because they have those team of computer science who can pore over this big data, and who can work on that. So a lot of that, global, kind of journalism is about big data, lots and lots of data. As I said, big data is something, which you can't, process in 2 or 3 computers. So it has to be, more than maybe, just if I have to give a figure, it has to be more than 4 or 5 terabytes of data. But it can also be small data and low key. So it doesn't have to be, high tech, Python coding to, extract data and make sense of it, because that also has to be done. But that is more of a specialization. But for regular, journalistic work, we can limit ourselves to and low technology. Just your Excel pivot tables. In fact, a lot of journalism is about pivot tables. Knowing about the trends and the insights and the stories from how to work with pivot tables. So for students out there, if you know pivot tables, then you're step ahead. So there you can just start getting data from dataset search.google.com, and you'll get a lot of data on health, on education, on crime, and you make stories out of it.
Dr. Pandey, Ishpreet has asked one question, that what is confidentiality in data journalism?
I mean, you have to, if it is public data, then probably confidentiality is not that vital, because you have to tell people that this is where the information comes from, because that provides another level of verifiability for readers as well. So as far as public data is concerned, there is no question of confidentiality. In fact, it's the other end. You have to make it available. You have to foreground the availability. So that's there. Otherwise, if it's a data that you have sourced through other means, then probably the source has to be confidential. But it's more about more information, because we are dealing with information overload and trying to decipher the signal from the noise. So that's where. But of course, there are cases where it has to be confidential, or if it falls under the purview of the Official Secrets Act or other acts, then you have to be very careful about that.
Dr. Pandey, Astha Umang has asked that how a reporter, a conventional reporter, a normal reporter, can be a data journalism reporter, or how can he practice a data journalism?
If you ask journalists, many of them, I just tell you a very small story. People are extremely careful about dealing with data sets themselves, because they think that if I probably make a wrong analysis, then it would be very visible to others. And so you have to if you start off, and as I said, I was talking about these workshops that we've held in few cities, especially in Jaipur, Jodhpur, Ahmedabad, and all these places. We've had people coming back, just from plain, as I said, from plain Excel pivot table example, they would come back with good data stories where they are putting in data as sources into their stories. So it starts off with very plain, simple data sets, very plain, simple information that is available from the district magistrate's office, or they are available on the district website. And you make a simple analysis about the trends and the outliers and the percentage change. So on and so forth, and you can so every journalist can be a potential data journalist, and many of them, they are actually doing it. They are doing some data journalism or the other, because if you know what questions to ask, then you need not do it yourself. You can kind of have a kind of partnership with a statistician or a computer scientist, and you can get answers for that.
Dr. Pandey, Ankita Tripathi has asked that can you name some news organizations which practice data journalism?
As I said, all big ones, in India as well. Just open the papers, you'll find a lot of. I mean, there's no one that who can be kept out of data journalism. As I said, even at district level, we've had organizations sending them to us for training. Them 2 or 3 days training So it's there. Among international journals, NYT, Washington Post, and all these journals, there are almost everybody has to do data journalism these days. You can't say that, okay, I will not do data. It's not. They are doing it in one way or the other. I mean, questioning is official field.
Yeah. Rizwan Ahmed has asked that, can you tell us some journalists who are actually practicing data journalism?
I will not be, it will not be right to give names, because there are many among the ones that, as I said, the ones I've had the occasion to interact in workshops and all. It will not be right, but if you see all the big names in the Sun Times, Times of India, there are some very good, stories there. Or if you want, I can share those stories, after this. But there are many people who are, doing this, and this is not something new. This has been there for quite some time.
Yeah. So I believe there are too many questions, but I mean, few questions were repetitive. So I believe that most of the questions have exhausted. If there are further few more questions, then I will request the participants to tell something more. And so now we are moving towards the end of this program. And it was really a very fruitful discussion. And as Dr. Umashankar Pandey himself pointed out, this is such a subject which needs hours. So simply in 30-40 minutes of his presentation, it was not possible that he could touch upon all the aspects. But then obviously he tried his best to give clarity on the basic issues of the data journalism, whether it's the big data or the small data, or whether it's the question of the comparison from the narrative journalism to the data journalism, and which I can also add with my experience as a practicing journalist for very long and working in print and electronic media, that journalism is some such thing which is never static. This is a very dynamic profession, so things keep on changing, new things keep on added, and then it's a profession wherein every day, every moment there is something new. So when we are in academics or in research, we try to find out the various trends which are happening in journalism, and then obviously we try every day something new. And as far as the data journalism is concerned, obviously there is a fight for the right kind of information, accurate information, the way we are fighting with the problem of the fake news, or the disinformation or the misinformation. I mean, all such kind of problems we are fighting with in journalism. So in such kind of scenario, data journalism is actually gives us a respite, because there are little chances of going wrong in this kind of. Obviously, if there is something wrong at the source level, or if we talk about the government sources, there is some deliberate attempt to mislead the people. And as journalists, we are taking all that information, treating that information as accurate since it's coming from the credible source. Now that, so then there could be a problem. But then data journalism is certainly, till now, whatever kinds of journalism we have been practicing, that is the best part of journalism, because we are completely depending on data, which is, I mean, wherein that is devoid of opinions, because this is one major problem that we face in journalism, in today's journalism, particularly on television channels, that the journalism is largely opinionated journalism. So we are saved from the opinions. These are the hard facts, they are reliable information, which we can certainly rely upon. But then one question, the final question, Dr. Pandey, I can ask from my side, that the way even today, the TV channels are fascinated about this narrative journalism, and either they don't rely much on the data, or even if they use the data, they sometimes deliberately use the misleading data. So how a viewer, how a receiver can save himself, because when something is coming from the mainstream media, from a news channel, from a newspaper, then really there is a problem for the receiver, for the media user. Can you say something, the final point on this?
yeah, we have to be as you know, educators and as a civil society, we have to be very careful in, you know, or we have to be very patient with media literacy and data literacy. Unless people are empowered, you know, this problem will not go away. And that empowerment is a long process, as I said. It has to start from our schools. It has to start with conversations like this. It has to be present on the social media. It has to be present in our WhatsApp chats. It has to be there, you know, it has to be there everywhere, because, you know, that empowerment has to be a regular process. And when people know that this is how data is sourced and this is how it is presented, or this is the other picture of it, that is when, you know, this pressure will start building. Unless this audience pressure is there, unless the audience takes, you know, cudgels on its own behalf, we will be, you know, fed with lazy journalism. But as I said, you know, as you know very well, this is just a transitional phase, and I'm sure these things are moving for the better.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for enlightening to all the participants in this session. And before winding up, let me inform to all the participants here in this session that in the series of the webinar, we have another session on 4th, but that is more targeted to the students than the academics and the researchers. That's on careers. I mean, the way the COVID-19 has happened, the changing scenario of the career options in the media sector. But then one important session which I believe most of you will be interested in, we are holding that session on 5th of June, and that is about the legal rights of migrant labor, and it is being addressed by a very prominent lawyer, Supreme Court lawyer and an activist, that is Mr. Prashant Bhushan. So if you like, that same time on 5th at 4 o'clock, we will be holding that session. So thank you all the participants, to all those who have spare time to join this session. Thank you, Dr. Umashankar Pandey, to be with us and giving so much knowledge, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.